A man trembled beneath a hangman's noose in a freezing courtyard. It was the morning of February 28, 1952. The execution took place inside Mokotów prison in Warsaw. Post-war Poland used this central facility to house and hang high-ranking Nazi officials. Rough stone walls enclosed the small space, absorbing the faint scuff of leather boots. Only a heavy silence hung over the empty yard. He faced the gallows completely alone. Just years earlier, he ruled as the sole master of an entire metropolis. He ordered mass deportations with a single signature. Now, the former official waited in total obscurity. He stood powerless before a few anonymous guards in a foreign capital. The executioner adjusted the thick hemp rope. He pulled the lever without ceremony. The wooden trapdoor snapped open. It ended the life of Albert Forster. No citizens gathered to witness his death. During the height of the war, he had governed as the Gauleiter and Reichskommissar of the Reichsgau Danzig, West Prussia. The path to that execution yard began half a century earlier in the Bavarian town of Fürth. Young Albert Forster spent his days performing the routine duties of a retail salesman. He was born on July 26, 1902, to a petty civil servant. The surrounding streets reflected widespread post-war unemployment, offering only dull brick facades. Forster possessed no military background, and his records showed no exceptional intellect. Working dead-end jobs offered this mediocre man no prospect of advancement. He lacked natural charisma, yet he watched the shifting political tides. Then the beer hall putsch of 1923 erupted in Munich during the national currency collapse. The uprising failed rapidly under police gunfire. However, the audacity of this failed Munich coup inspired millions of desperate young Germans. The Munich Rebellion revealed a fast social elevator for the ambitious clerk. The rebuilt party held exactly 27,000 members in 1925. Forster joined this small political faction for rapid promotion rather than deep ideology. He never challenged senior directives. He executed daily tasks silently. Inside the expanding leadership ranks, strict organizational discipline carried far more weight than intellectual brilliance. Soon, this quiet provincial assistant would personally dictate the survival of countless thousands. He became the regional Gauleiter of Danzig in 1930. His age was exactly 28. That age secured him Europe's most volatile post. Hitler bypassed the standard hierarchy for him. A free city under League of Nations supervision rested entirely in the hands of one-party appointee. Forster held a direct, informal line to the dictator. Other officials envied this access. Historian Dieter Schenk notes the leader considered him his personal man on the ground. Danzig sat right at the mouth of the Vistula River. Heavy cranes moved coal across the port docks. Those docks provided Poland's only major maritime route. By the early 30s, the local population exceeded 350,000 people. It was a strategic trap. The territory belonged to no single nation, yet the loyalists controlled the streets. He watched the water. He waited for Berlin. The wait ended with a broadside. Naval guns shattered the pre-dawn darkness over Westerplatte. The first shots of the war came from the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein. It sat inside the harbor under the guise of a friendly visit. At exactly 4:48 in the morning on September 1, 1939, the deception dropped. The heavy rumble of naval artillery rolled across the Danzig port. Inside the peninsula, 182 Polish soldiers took up positions. Major Henryk Sucharski commanded the isolated garrison. Thousands of advancing German troops pushed forward under the bombardment. The defenders had no retreat. They fought for 7 straight days while concrete bunkers collapsed. By the 7th morning, the garrison had exactly 0 rounds of ammunition left. 0 referendums decided the city's fate. While those isolated soldiers exhausted their ammunition, Albert Forster already stood before a microphone in central Danzig. Street loudspeakers emitted a sharp crackle of static interference, broadcasting his voice. He announced the formal annexation of the territory into the Third Reich without any legal procedure. By September 8, 1939, Adolf Hitler arrived to celebrate the political capture. Forster stood beside him during the visit and secured his appointment as Reichstatthalter of the newly created administrative district. A single decree handed exactly 2,300,000 people over to the control of one official. The vast majority of this population consisted of ethnic Poles. The new administration immediately began erasing this massive demographic bloc. How do you force a population to change its nationality overnight? You introduce the Volksliste registry. First came the street rules. Speaking Polish in public was strictly forbidden. Then came the mandatory paperwork. A resident approached a wooden table. The official handed over a blank form. A pen crossed out the original Polish name. A clerk wrote a German equivalent instead. The dull thud of an ink stamp finalized the document. Bureaucrats erased their past. Those who rejected this classification faced immediate consequences. Some went straight to concentration camps. Others faced mass deportation to an occupation zone covering 94,000 square kilometers, a territory formed into a reservation the exact size of Portugal. Guards loaded the refusers onto trains bound for the general government. While the trains carried refusers away, Albert Forster dispatched his registration reports to Berlin exactly like a corporate manager closing the quarter. Typed columns of digits documented his formal plan to Germanize 80% of the regional population within a single decade. But this dry accounting concealed a hidden campaign of biological kidnapping. Inside the stark white walls of local medical offices, specialists evaluated young boys and girls for racially acceptable features. Uniformed personnel measured facial proportions and examined the exact shade of blonde hair and blue eyes. A doctor made a quick pencil mark on a wooden clipboard. Immediately after the medical assessment, armed guards separated the chosen children from their parents. The broader Lebensborn program absorbed up to 200,000 kidnapped Polish children across the occupied territories during the war years. Forster directed this operation locally, distributing the selected victims directly into approved German foster families. These parents raised the boys and girls with fabricated histories and zero knowledge of their true biological origins. Their real names disappeared. While abducted youth disappeared into German homes, administrators purged adults capable of teaching Polish history. October 1939. Armed guards walked directly into Władysław Szuda's classroom mid-lesson. The veteran educator had 20 years of teaching experience. Uniformed men ordered him to step away from the blackboard. A heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. He stepped out. The children stayed seated quietly at their desks. Some students in the room were just 9 years old. Szuda was never seen again. This was the intelligentsia. Starting in autumn 1939, Nazi security forces targeted priests, lawyers, and school teachers. The SS and police shot roughly 100,000 members of the intelligentsia and clergy across Poland. Officials eliminated local community leaders to prevent organized protest. Without cultural pillars, the capacity for resistance collapsed. The next morning, the local school officially switched to the German educational curriculum. Guests from Berlin gathered in a confiscated villa on the Danzig coast. Servants poured wine in formal dining rooms. Outside these walls, Polish families had exactly 2 hours to pack a single suitcase before forced eviction. Albert Forster simply took their properties. He organized autumn hunting parties for visiting state officials. Local beaters drove game across vast estates that had belonged to Polish nobility for centuries. High-ranking men in tailored coats fired rifles and drank French cognac. Forster hosted these retreats to secure political favor, treating the stolen countryside as his personal resort. Back in his office, he drafted official correspondence to Heinrich Himmler. The heavy document paper bore the sharp, black ink stamp of the Gauleiter seal. In these letters, Forster defined his assimilation strategy as a civilized alternative to mass murder. He pointed directly to Arthur Greiser, the Gauleiter commanding the neighboring Warthegau territory. Greiser operated the Chelmno death camp. Greiser ordered public executions in town squares. Compared to the exhaust fumes of Warsaw, Forster firmly considered himself a moderate politician. He expected Berlin to praise his administrative restraint. But the truth of his restraint was completely different. Instead of firing squads, his administration deployed forms and decrees. His moderation consisted of stealing 9-year-old children, legally erasing family names, and banning an entire spoken language. The paperwork left no obvious piles of bodies in the streets. The cultural destruction remained hidden inside filing cabinets and Germanized orphanages. By early 1945, the region had been dismantled on paper. Polish historian Czesław Madejczyk categorized this specific policy as a distinct method of annihilation. According to his analysis, it achieved cultural destruction without the immediate visual evidence of mass graves. The wounds were permanent. They were simply harder to photograph. The evidence of destruction soon shifted from cultural to physical, as the front line reached the stolen villas of the Gauleiter in the spring of 1945. 300,000 German civilians scrambled toward the Baltic ports to find rescue ships. Albert Forster never issued an evacuation order for his unbreakable fortress, choosing instead to simply vanish. Crowds remained crushed against the docks, while Soviet aircraft struck the loading zones. On January 30, 1945, torpedoes shattered the Wilhelm Gustloff. 9,000 people drowned in the freezing water, a maritime death toll surpassing the Titanic disaster by 6 times. By March 1945, the heavy thud of Soviet artillery shells vibrated through the foundations of Danzig. On March 23, the attacking troops officially captured the streets. The city that initiated the conflict now consisted entirely of burning timber and silent ruins. Throughout this military collapse, the man who ordered the cultural erasure hid within the chaotic streams of displaced refugees. When the government surrendered on May 8, 1945, the former dictator stripped off his insignia and attempted to dissolve into a column of retreating Wehrmacht infantry. Hiding among the refugees failed. British troops quickly arrested the former official. Albert Forster possessed no underground escape network. He had no wealthy patrons waiting in South America. Unlike Adolf Eichmann, who secured safe passage to Argentina, or Joseph Mengele, Forster faced immediate capture. In 1947, British authorities transferred him to Polish custody. By 1948, he sat in a courtroom in Danzig. He returned as a prisoner to the exact city he had dismantled. Survivors delivered testimonies. Prosecutors stacked physical evidence on the tables. They presented intelligence files, deportation orders, and demographic registries. Every document bore his signature. His defense relied entirely on shifting the blame. He claimed he merely followed directives and enacted milder policies than his peers. The judges dismissed the excuses. On April 29, 1948, the court sentenced him to death for war crimes. He spent 4 years filing appeals and clemency motions. The delays ended on February 28, 1952. Guards brought him to the execution yard inside Mokotów prison in Warsaw. During the occupation, the Gestapo had used this exact facility to hold and interrogate Polish political prisoners. The hanging proceeded. 49 years of life, 15 years of absolute power. The man executed in the Warsaw prison was not a creature forged in a laboratory. He brought destruction to the region, not as a natural disaster, but as a perfectly obedient clerk with a pen. Albert Forster was an unremarkable individual from the Bavarian town of Fürth. Forster only needed boundless ambition and a deliberate willingness to look away from the actual victims of his paperwork. The stroke of a fountain pen on official documents quietly transformed human beings into raw material. Families in Danzig, West Prussia lost their homes and their children. A man behind a desk categorized them according to racial quotas. He made calculated choices, and the administration rewarded him for every single one. The catastrophe stemmed from the desires of a functionary climbing the career ladder. The reckoning arrived long after the mass graves were filled, and the kidnapped children had forgotten their real parents. The court delivered its final verdict without any grand historical declarations. The surviving Polish families received a definitive physical conclusion to a decade of suffering. The authorities recorded the execution in the state registry on February 28, 1952.